I'm excited and honored because this is obviously a historic moment that we're in. This is a historic day of Juneteenth. I can think of nothing better to do than to share this movie with a group of Massachusetts teachers. My first job out of college was a teacher, and my last job in my union career after 40 years was organizing charter school teachers. My wife was a teacher, so teaching is very dear to my heart. And two of the leading characters in this play, which is now a movie, you're going to see Susan B. Anthony and Frances Harper were teachers, which was one of the only occupations available to a woman that got some education in 1869. And this film is from a musical that ran live in 2019 and 20 in Baltimore called The Moment Was Now. But like many things, it was cut short in the beginning of March by the COVID crisis. Fortunately, one of our live performances was filmed, and Mike Wickline, the filmmaker, did a beautiful job of taking a play and creating a film out of it. The Moment Was Now takes place in 1869 and uses music and the real words from largely from the historical characters that were in it to tell a story of the struggle of these characters to build a unified movement coming out of the Civil War. This was described as a moment when America almost did the right thing. And the characters in the film, in addition to Susan B. Anthony, who as a suffragist and a women's leader was organizing women workers at this time, Frances Harper is an African-American woman. She's a lead character. She was a teacher, but she was also a writer, a poet, and a published author, and an agitator. Isaac Myers is a shipyard worker and a black trade unionist. William Silvis was an iron worker, and at this point was the leader of the National Labor Union, which had 300,000 members in 1869. And the setting of the play shows when he actually invited Isaac Myers to come before a national meeting of the National Labor Union and tell the white workers in the National Labor Union, all white men, why they needed to include black people if they were ever going to succeed. And that's a song in this play. You also had Frederick Douglass was in the play, and Jay Gould, who was a robber baron during that era. And the play is sort of a struggle between these leaders of all these powerful social movements to try to build a united movement in the coming era of the Industrial Revolution to make sure everybody got their fair share. And it was an amazing moment because during Reconstruction was a time when African Americans were rising. They were asking for land, the vote, and education. And one of the incredible things that happened is that the Southern constitutions got rewritten for a moment, and public education for the first time was made available in the South, but it was available to everybody. Although it was led by the initiative of African Americans, everybody benefited. And of course, many of these gains under Reconstruction were taken back under Jim Crow, but you really need to understand Reconstruction to understand what's happening now. Because in many ways, the Civil Rights Movement was the second Reconstruction, and we are on the verge of what is a third Reconstruction, and you're all a part of it. And we are now celebrating 100 years since the suffrage for women got the right, 115 years since the 15th Amendment, and we're fighting for full realization of these things that we've won in the past. I hope you'll find the characters in the story and the music inspiring. The film and a curriculum are available for teachers. High school students that saw this loved it. And please come back afterwards to tell me what you think, and so we can have some kind of a discussion. And I'd love to, I hope you enjoy it, and thanks again for the invitation.
we know that when our students are learning, the best ways we can help them learn is not a lecture, right? It's multimedia, it's interactive, and it feels like that's what we were able to capture for you tonight. You know, Jean's film is uplifting, it's heavy, you make connections to what's happening in the labor movement in general, what's happening today. All at the same time, you're dialoguing with each other over the chat. And that was exciting to watch, the multiple ideas that came up, the conversations between each other, and still the message from you all, particularly as we're getting towards the end, you're all talking about feeling hopeful that change is now, that this can happen. So
it's as far as I can get it.
To be with you. And I'm glad that Jean gave us such rich material for us to have our own dialogue. And today is not the end of that conversation. We're looking forward to continuing the conversation, and also really just be thinking how you might use a film like this film in particular, to do your own movie screen. So Jean, thank you so much for having such a rich centerpiece of art for us to work with.
Thank you. Thank you. I just say, Mary, it was such a pleasure both to show this, but also just to watch the way all your members were just sort of like thinking out loud and responding, and that's sort of why we did it. So I'm open for any questions, and just thank you for your vision to like put this out to your whole membership, and I hope we can keep making it useful to you.
Great, thank you. So Dan, do we have questions coming in through the Q&A box or people writing in the chat? How do you want to do this?
I'm muted. We have a question from Cedric Cunningham, who Cedric, you can now turn your mic on.
Don't pop into the picture. I'm just wanting you to see.
Okay. Can you hear me?
No.
Yes.
Oh.
I'm just curious, how come there's not a presence of Native Americans in this production? I'm partially Native American, so that's one reason why I'm asking, and looking at Native Americans weren't even recognized in this country until around 24. I'm just wondering how come there's no, presence. And then other people are going to probably ask questions. How come Asian Americans, especially like Chinese, how come there's no presence also, in the production? And then looking at also, the Hispanic community. So my first one is really, towards Native Americans.
Thank you. It's a good question, and I struggle with that. And there's a couple references about people who are being excluded. And while this was going on, and shortly thereafter, the Civil War, the troops, after they left Reconstruction, they went out west and slaughtered Native people. But ultimately, Cedric, I couldn't figure out how to do it in a way that had some integrity, other than sort of like minimize it and have a reference or something, and still cover all the other material. But it was painful to me. I looked at it a bunch, and ultimately I couldn't get there. And it's another story that needs to be told. Same with the Native people and the Chinese people. And I'm just going to have to do that one, or someone else is. But thank you for raising that.
Great. What other questions do people have for Jean? I know there was a lot of good discussion happening in the chat earlier. Jean, do you want to talk about the curriculum at all? I think there were a few questions related to the curriculum during the chat.
First, I want to say one thing, which also was in the chat, which I didn't get a chance to say in my introduction. And that was this whole production was a very cooperative effort. I did all the research, the initial writing and the initial lyrics and getting the ideas for the song together. And then I brought Daryl in, my director, who's Isaac Myers. I brought the musicians in and we started working the music and then the cast. So it was sort of like I took it to a certain point and then turned it over to the group of people you saw up on the stage and in the music pit there, and they created the rest. So I feel like very fortunate that we had that kind of talent and that we were able to sort of work together. I paid everybody as much as I could, but these are people who are professionals, but they're always being underpaid. And that's just one of the challenges we had. But they put a lot of their heart into this. In terms of the curriculum, I put a link to the curriculum in there. What we've done is I've teamed up with Teaching for Change, which has this thing called the Zin Education Project. That the Zin Education Project has a whole section on curriculum, and that includes the film. And the film is broken into scenes for people that want it. So there's a possibility of showing a scene, for instance, about Susan B. Anthony or Frances Harper, reading something about her, and there's parallel information, and then having a conversation with students, you know, having seen a song, read something and all. So that's sort of live and it's available to people.
Gene, we also have in the Q&A, Carrie Costello from Andover asked a question about how you chose the posters and slogans that were part of the visual elements. I know there was a question in the chat about that earlier too, about potentially accessing some of those resources.
Yeah, my intention is to make that publicly available. What I haven't done is to do the thorough enough research on what's in the public domain. And so before I officially release that, I need to go through all the different graphics. But there is one woman who, as a volunteer to support this play, a woman named Marilyn Julius, captured about 250 images and spent many hours. And we worked together trying to match the images to the words in the song. And because we didn't have the money to do a fancy set of props and everything, so we projected this behind the music and the acting with the idea that people learn by seeing as well as by listening and by the music. So this added a whole powerful set of images. So we are working on that.
Do we have any other questions for Gene? While we wait to see if any come in, I will just say quickly a couple of things that'll be useful information for people to know. You will probably within the next hour receive an email from Mobilize, which is our registration platform. We ask you basically just to give it this program a thumbs up or thumbs down. That's how you will register that you attended the program, and we'll be using that for providing certificates to anybody who wants them. So for certificate purposes, but also so we can get as accurate an attendance read as possible, we do ask people to just very quickly fill out the survey that you'll get from Mobilize in either your email or your text. And then, yeah, I think we've got a question from Cynthia. Cynthia, you can unmute yourself.
Okay. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm wondering, Gene, is the situation that you created in the play historically accurate? Did Frederick Douglass bring these people together hoping that they could see their commonality and work together?
That's a great question, Cynthia. If I have to describe this, it's more like a historical novel than a documentary.
Yeah.
So most of the words and the lyrics in there were either right from people's mouths, like "Not a Straw in the Way" that Frances Harper sang. She said that, a lot of that. But of course, they didn't speak in rhymes and poems and stuff like that. So I had to do that work. These characters had lots of interrelationships. For example, Frederick Douglass worked and escaped from the same shipyard that Isaac Myers later worked in when this, in 1869, when this was happening. They knew each other, and Isaac Myers was organizing a national labor union at the time, just like Silvis was. And that's why he says to him, I'll go to your convention, but will you come to mine? And he really had a national convention. Susan B. Anthony, of course, famously knew Frederick Douglass. Susan B. and Frederick and Frances Harper were in the same post-Civil War organizations. Anyway, there were innumerable interrelationships that I drew from, but nobody ever put them all in the same room, so I did that.
Well, it was a great idea.
Thank you. There's one other quick thing I want to say while people are thinking, if there's no other question, which is that we have a website. It's just themomentwasnow.com. That itself has lots of information on it, background and pictures and other stuff. So I encourage people to go to that. You can also write me through the website, or you could reach me through Dan if you wanted to arrange to have a chance to show the movie for your class or something. Some people asked about that. We did one performance for high schools, and we had 150 Baltimore high school students. I was very nervous because I just wasn't sure, because it is very complicated and lots of words and concepts, and they were totally enraptured. I was just, it was just beautiful for me to watch, and they asked a great set of questions. But part of it was because some of them had studied the curriculum from the Zinn Education Project, so they knew the characters. Most people don't know these characters. So anyway, I hope people will, look on the site and reach out to me if you want to reach me. And if there's any more questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, I would say the moment is now. And as Frederick Douglass said, moments come and moments pass, but moments don't last forever. So we cannot freeze them, so we must seize them.
We do have one more question, it looks like, in the Q&A, Gene. How long from start to finish did it take you to conceive and produce the musical?
It took me about 2 years of writing and research and preparation to get it to the stage, and that was in September of 2019. Then we did a lot of rework. We added some songs, we tightened things up, and we did the performances for Black History, Women's History Month in Baltimore. All these characters had ties to Baltimore. Then we got hit by COVID. So we were going to show up in Boston in May, but we had to cancel everything. So it's now going into 3 years since I started. And by the way, some people did say, we need to get this in a theater. What about this theater or that theater? We're open to anybody that wants to put it on or wants to bring our team up to put it on once we're able to do that. We've got the score, we've got the whole, everything's written out, and they got the film. So if a theater company wants to produce it, we'd be happy to work with them.
Great, thank you. Nellie Taylor is asking, will you please tell us more about the musicians, their previous work, how you found them, and their contributions to the work overall?
As you can tell, you can't really see them that well. The musicians were just amazing. And I knew the music director, Gwen Pearson, who you couldn't see him that well from there. He was on the keyboard. He helped me with another play. And then we brought in the Chester Burke Jr., who was a lead piano player, and you could see him from time to time. He's really a genius in my view. And they both graduated Peabody Music Academy. They brought in the other musicians, the percussionist and the bass player, who were just excellent. And the musicians, for everybody, it was sort of a labor of love, even though not everybody sort of had the same kind of political engagement I did, but they were so excited to be a part of this and to watch the audiences full of teachers. We had railroad workers, we had returning citizens who can't afford to go to plays, and lots of sort of a really widely diverse audience. And so it was very exciting to sort of do it for people who the play is really about. You know, it was about them and it was for them, and they were in the room. So that was a big accomplishment for us.
There question in the chat, information about donating to your work and the performers or others in the show?
Well, there is a, on my, if you go to themomentwasnow.com, there's a little button you can hit, you can make a contribution. And I'd certainly appreciate that. I believe your union's going to make a contribution, I've been told.